Welcome, friend. Before we begin tonight's journey through history, take a moment to settle in. Find a comfortable position, slow your breathing, and let your mind rest. As you listen, let your thoughts drift gently, as though carried on a slow-moving current. I would love to know where you are listening from and what time it is for you right now. It is remarkable to think that people across the world, at so many different hours of the day, share this same quiet space of history together. Tonight, we step into a chapter of the 20th century that is both harsh and fascinating. The Soviet Gulag system, spanning across Siberia and beyond, these labor camps were places of discipline, punishment, and survival. They were remote, often frozen, built far from cities, and inhabited by thousands of men and women who struggled daily to endure. This will not be a story of drama or sensationalism. It will be slow, steady, and measured, designed not to excite, but to guide you into calm reflection. The gulags were difficult places, but we will explore them gently, focusing on daily rhythms, human endurance, and the ways in which life continued even in such environments. And so, let us begin by imagining the daily life of someone sent to a Soviet labor camp, far away from the comforts of home. Imagine, for a moment, waking not in the comfort of your own home, but in a wooden barrack deep in the Siberian wilderness. The structure is simple, built quickly, with rough planks for walls and a roof that creaks under snow in winter or rattles in summer storms. The air inside is heavy, damp, and cold. Even in the warmth of summer, a chill lingers in the nights, and in winter, the frost creeps across the walls and stiffens your blanket. As though the cold itself has weight, you lie on a wooden bunk, one among dozens in the long barrack room. Each bunk is narrow, the bedding thin, the straw mattress worn and lumpy. You hear the sound of others stirring, the quiet coughs, the shuffling of feet against the floor, the muted groans of those whose bodies ache from yesterday's labor. The room smells faintly of smoke, damp wool, and sweat, the air never fully fresh, for windows are small and frost-covered. A whistle or a bell rings outside. It is not a loud sound, but it carries finality. The day has begun. Slowly, everyone rises. There is no rush, but also no hesitation, for the rhythm of the camp is strict, repeated each day without variation. You put on your clothes, stiff and heavy from the cold, boots that may still be damp from yesterday's snow or mud. Stepping outside, the morning air cuts sharply against your skin. In winter, the cold is immediate, biting, and absolute, the kind that stiffens fingers in minutes and freezes breath into small clouds. In summer, the air is warmer, but still damp, carrying the scent of pine and wet soil. Around you stretches the camp, rows of barracks, watchtowers at the corners, fences tall and firm. Beyond the fence lies the forest, vast, endless, and silent. It is this wilderness that makes the camp secure as much as the guards do. The roll call begins. Prisoners line up, counted one by one. The guards watch, silent and still, their breath also visible in the air. It is a ritual, repeated every day, a reminder that no one belongs to themselves alone here. Everyone is accounted for, numbered, part of the machinery of the camp. Breakfast comes next. The meal is plain. A piece of black bread, often dense and sour, perhaps a ladle of thin porridge or watery soup. The smell is faint, the taste simple, yet it is enough to quiet the hunger that began in the night. You eat slowly, savoring each bite, not for pleasure, but for sustenance. Every crumb matters. Every drop of broth helps carry you into the long hours ahead. Then comes the work. This is the defining rhythm of life in the Gulag. You walk in groups, boots crunching through snow or squelching through mud, toward the site where the day's labor awaits. Some go to the forests to cut timber, others descend into mines, shafts carved deep into the earth, where the air is damp and the walls glisten faintly with moisture. Still others dig canals, or lay rails for tracks stretching across empty land. Imagine standing in the forest with an axe in hand. The trees are tall, their trunks thick, their bark rough beneath your fingers. The sound of axes echoes across the clearing. Steady, rhythmic, unbroken. Each strike sends a vibration through your arms, each swing adding to the fatigue that builds steadily, hour by hour. When a tree falls, the crash reverberates, startling birds into flight, then silence returns, broken only by the next blow. In the mines, the air is different. It is heavy with dust, the glow of lamps faint, the ground damp underfoot. The sound of picks against stone is constant, sharp and metallic. The dust coats your clothes, your hair, even your breath. The tunnels echo with voices, some speaking quietly, some coughing, some singing softly to pass the time. It is monotonous, yet it continues day after day. At midday, work stops briefly. Another meal is given. Soup again, often thin, perhaps with a few grains of barley or a sliver of potato. It is warm, and warmth matters more than flavor. You sit with others, bowls in hand, speaking little, saving your strength. Then the work resumes, as though the pause had never occurred. The afternoon stretches long, the body growing heavier with each hour. The rhythm is relentless. Chop, dig, haul, lift. Simple motions repeated endlessly. Around you, guards watch. They say little, but their presence is constant, a silent reminder that the labor is not optional. At last, the day's work ends. The march back to camp begins. The air is filled with the sound of boots against the frozen ground. The shuffle of weary steps, the quiet murmur of voices too tired for conversation. The camp comes into view again, its fences and towers silhouetted against the evening sky. Inside the barracks, the stove burns faintly, offering a pocket of warmth that never seems to spread far enough. Clothes hang to dry, though they rarely lose their dampness. Some sit in silence, staring into the fire. Others whisper quietly, sharing memories of families left behind, of lives once lived in distant cities, of food they once enjoyed but no longer taste. Occasionally, a song is hummed softly, almost too low to hear, a fragment of melody carried from another life. The evening meal is served. Bread again, perhaps a thin stew. It is eaten without haste, without ceremony, simply as preparation for tomorrow. Night settles over the camp. The watchtowers glow faintly with lanterns. The fences stand tall and unyielding. Inside, the barrack grows quiet. The fire burns low. Shadows lengthen across the walls. The breathing of dozens of people fills the silence. The cold seeps in again, steady and patient. Sleep comes not as comfort, but as necessity. For tomorrow, the rhythm begins again. And yet, even here, small sparks of humanity endure. A shared story, a kind gesture, a scrap of bread offered to another. It is in these small acts that survival becomes possible, even in the harshest of places. This was daily life in the Soviet Gulag, a world of repetition, of labor, of cold, and hunger, yet also of resilience, where people endured not only through strength, but through memory, hope, and the quiet rhythm of human connection. From this daily rhythm, let us now turn to the figure most associated with the Gulag system, the man under whose rule it expanded to its greatest scale. In our next segment, we will step into the life of Joseph Stalin and the choices that shaped the fate of millions. When we think of the Soviet Gulags, one name rises above all others: Joseph Stalin. It was under his rule that the camps grew from scattered labor colonies into a sprawling system that stretched across the Soviet Union, binding together the far reaches of Siberia, the Arctic, and Central Asia. To understand the Gulag, we must first understand the man who made it central to his governance. Stalin was not born into power. He entered the world in 1878 in the small Georgian town of Gori, far from the great capitals of Moscow or St. Petersburg. His birth name was Ioseb Bessarianis Z. Jugashvili Joseph. His father was a shoemaker, stern and often absent, while his mother was deeply religious and devoted to her son's education. Imagine the narrow streets of Gori at that time. Stone houses with wooden balconies, markets filled with the sound of merchants and livestock, the smell of bread baking in clay ovens. It was a provincial world, distant from the pulse of empire, yet rich in its own rhythms. From an early age, Stalin was small, scarred by illness, and sometimes mocked by his peers. But he also displayed determination, a drive that would shape his later life. His mother hoped he would become a priest, sending him to study at a seminary. There he encountered not only theology, but revolutionary ideas carried in forbidden books. The young Stalin read works that criticized monarchy, inequality, and empire, words that inspired a shift in his path. Leaving behind the seminary, Stalin entered the underground world of revolutionaries. He adopted aliases, organized strikes, and spread pamphlets. Again and again, he was arrested and exiled to remote corners of Siberia. Picture him there, in a snow-covered village, far from the world he wished to change. The houses are simple, the days long, the nights endless. Exile was meant to break the will, but for Stalin it became a rhythm he endured, returning each time with more determination. It was during these years that he took the name Stalin, meaning man of steel. It was a name of resolve, of hardness, of unyielding endurance, qualities he wished to project and later to embody. In 1917, the Russian Revolution overturned the empire, replacing Tsarist rule with Soviet power. Among the revolutionaries, Stalin was not the most prominent. Lenin, Trotsky, and others took center stage. But Stalin was steady, patient, and skilled in the details of administration, the quiet work of organizing, managing, and controlling. After Lenin's death in 1924, a struggle for leadership began. Through alliances, maneuvering, and careful elimination of rivals, Stalin rose steadily until he stood as the unchallenged leader of the Soviet Union. By the late 1920s, he was firmly in control, and it was then that he began to shape the Soviet Union into the vision he carried, a vision that relied on industrialization, collectivization, and, for those who resisted, the Gulag. Labor camps had existed before Stalin, used sporadically for criminals and political exiles. But under his rule, they became a vast system, an integral part of the Soviet economy and a tool of political control. The Gulag was not a single place, but thousands of camps spread across the Soviet Union. They appeared in the forests of Siberia, on the shores of the Arctic, in the deserts of Kazakhstan. Each camp was connected to the others through a web of administration, all reporting upward, all feeding the needs of the state. Imagine a map of the Soviet Union. It stretches across 11 time zones, vast and varied. Forests, tundra, mountains, steppes. Now imagine points of light scattered across it, each a camp, each filled with thousands of men and women. Together, they formed an invisible network of labor, discipline, and endurance. Stalin used the Gulag for many purposes. It punished political opponents, those accused of dissent, of criticism, of opposition, whether real or imagined. It absorbed ordinary criminals, swept into the system alongside intellectuals, peasants, and workers. And it provided labor for the grand projects of the state. Railways built through frozen forests, canals dug by hand through swamps and earth, mines opened in the far north, extracting gold, coal, and minerals. Forests cleared, timber shipped, cities supplied. The Gulag became a workforce that endured the harshest conditions, where human endurance was stretched to its limits to fuel the ambitions of the Soviet Union. Numbers give us a sense of scale. By the 1930s, millions had passed through the Gulag system. At its peak, in the 1950s, estimates suggest more than 2.5 million people were imprisoned in the camps at once, with many millions more having experienced them at some point in their lives. But numbers alone cannot capture the experience. Behind each figure was a life interrupted, a farmer removed from his village, a teacher taken from his classroom, a poet silenced, a worker accused of theft, a family broken apart. Each found themselves in the same barracks, the same labor details, the same struggle to endure. For Stalin, the Gulag was both practical and symbolic. It provided labor, feeding the industrial needs of the state, but it also created fear, a constant reminder that dissent was dangerous, that the state's reach extended everywhere, that anyone could disappear into the camps. His rule was marked by paranoia, purges, and the constant search for enemies. The Gulag was the space where those enemies, real or imagined, were placed, removed from society, yet still used to serve the state. Picture, once more, the camp at night. The barracks are quiet, the guards still watch, the fences still stand, but beyond those fences lies the vastness of the Soviet Union, and beyond that, the figure of Stalin himself, seated in Moscow, directing policies that ripple outward into every corner of the land. His face appeared in portraits across the nation, his words in newspapers, his decisions in the lives of millions. To live in his time was to live under his shadow, whether in freedom or in the Gulag. From the life and rule of Stalin, we will turn in our next segment to the mystery that still lingers. The hidden voices of the Gulag, the diaries, letters, and memoirs of those who lived through it, whose words were often silenced, but which remain as fragments of memory for us to hear today. When we think of the Gulag, we often picture the fences, the barracks, the endless forests, and the labor. But within those spaces were individuals, men and women, each with their own thoughts, memories, and voices. For many years, their stories were hidden. Some wrote in secret, on scraps of paper or the backs of old forms. Others carried their memories silently, waiting until freedom allowed them to speak. These voices, fragile but enduring, are what allow us to glimpse the human side of the Gulag, not only the system, but the lives within it. To write in the Gulag was to take a risk. Paper was scarce, pens rarer still, and secrecy was essential. If a guard discovered a diary, it could mean punishment, loss of rations, or worse. And yet, some prisoners wrote, imagine a small scrap of paper, folded carefully and hidden beneath straw, or in the lining of a coat. On it are words hastily scrawled, describing the day's work, the bitter cold, the fleeting comfort of a kind gesture. Each line is fragile, each sentence a quiet act of defiance, a refusal to let the experience vanish into silence. Others memorized verses or stories, reciting them quietly to trusted friends, preserving not only their own thoughts, but the collective memory of those around them. Occasionally, prisoners were permitted to send letters to their families. These letters, however, were censored. Every word was read by camp officials before leaving, every line judged for tone and content. Imagine sitting at a wooden table, pen in hand, knowing that your words must be careful. You write that you are well, that you are healthy, that work continues. You avoid details of hunger, of cold, of exhaustion. You do not mention the endless forests, the damp mines, the fences that hold you in. Instead, you ask after family, after children, after harvests in villages you may never see again. The letters that survived are often simple, almost restrained. But between the lines, one can feel the weight of absence, the longing for home, the silence of what cannot be said. For those who survived the Gulag and later regained freedom, writing often became a way to remember, to give voice to what had been endured. In the decades after Stalin's death, memoirs began to emerge. Long, careful accounts written in quiet rooms, sometimes in exile, sometimes in return to familiar homes. These memoirs vary in tone. Some are factual, listing details with precision, the number of hours worked, the exact rations given, the temperatures recorded each winter. Others are more reflective, describing feelings, memories, and the small human details that statistics cannot capture. Imagine an old man sitting by a lamp, pen scratching across paper. He pauses often, gazing at the flame, recalling moments he has not spoken of in years. He writes slowly, deliberately, as though each word carries not just memory, but weight. For him, writing is not only record, but release, a way to transform silence into voice. Among the hidden voices were poets, who turned their experiences into verse. Some poems were memorized and passed orally, shared in whispers at night when the guards could not hear. Others were written down and smuggled out, preserved against the odds. The poems often spoke not of grand events, but of small, quiet moments. The sound of wind through the trees, the sight of smoke rising from a chimney, the memory of bread shared with a friend. They remind us that even in the harshest of places, beauty could be found in the simplest details. Yet, for every voice that was preserved, many more were lost. Diaries destroyed, letters never sent, memories carried to the grave. The Gulag was not only a place of labor, but of silence. The state sought to erase individuality, to reduce people to numbers, to make the memory of the camps vanish as though it had never existed. And so, the voices that remain are all the more precious, fragile fragments of a larger story, pieces of a vast mosaic we can only glimpse. Imagine sitting now in a quiet room, holding one of these diaries or letters. The paper is yellowed, the ink faded, the handwriting uneven. Yet, as you read, the camp comes alive again. The frost, the fences, the whispers in the barracks, the endless rhythm of work. The Gulag was a place designed to silence. But through these hidden voices, the silence is broken. The human presence endures, soft and steady, like a candle that flickers but does not go out. From these fragile voices, we will turn next to another layer of contrast. In our following segment, we will look not at the prisoners, but at those who stood on the other side of the fence. The guards, officials, and administrators, whose lives, though privileged, were also shaped by the Gulag system. When we think of the Gulag, we often imagine the prisoners, their labor, their barracks, their daily struggle. But life also existed on the other side of the fence. The guards and administrators, the ones who watched, who counted, who enforced the rhythm of the camps. They, too, lived within this system. Their experiences were different, but their lives were also shaped by the remote wilderness, by discipline, and by the quiet weight of duty. Picture the tall wooden fences of a Gulag camp, lined with watchtowers at each corner. In those towers stand guards, rifles slung across their shoulders, scanning the horizon. Theirs is a life of observation, of vigilance, of repetition. At dawn, they rise, as the prisoners do. Though their barracks are warmer, their food more plentiful. They eat bread, porridge, perhaps some meat or tea. Their uniforms are thicker, lined with fur against the cold. They are better supplied, yet they too must endure the same bitter climate, the same long winters, the same remoteness from home. Their duties are steady, defined by order and repetition. They supervise roll call, checking each prisoner against the list. They march alongside work details, rifles in hand, walking through forests, across mines, or along half-built railways. They pace the fences at night, their boots crunching in the snow, their breath visible in the beam of lanterns. Theirs is not a life of labor in the fields or mines, but of constant watchfulness. The discipline is strict, the expectations clear. Order must be maintained, escapes prevented, work completed. Above the guards stood the administrators, men who oversaw entire camps or even networks of them. Their lives were more comfortable still, with private houses, families, and access to supplies. They lived with less fear of hunger, less exposure to the cold, but they carried the weight of paperwork, reports, and quotas. Imagine an office in the middle of a Siberian camp, a wooden desk, stacks of files, the sound of a pen scratching across paper. The administrator signs orders, calculates rations, writes reports for Moscow. For him, the camp is not only a prison, but an economic unit, a source of timber, coal, or construction. Yet, even here, isolation pressed in. The winters were long, the distances great. To serve as a camp official often meant years away from the cities, from family, from the rhythms of ordinary Soviet life. The guards and officials were not all alike. Some were harsh, enforcing rules without mercy. Others showed moments of humanity, a word of kindness, a gesture of leniency, a quiet act of compassion that, though small, could mean much to a prisoner. For many, duty was simply duty. They followed orders, carried out routines, did what was expected of them. Few questioned the system, for to question it was dangerous, even for those in uniform. The Gulag was not only a place of punishment for prisoners, it was also a reminder to the guards themselves that no one was beyond the state's reach. And yet, for all their differences, guards and prisoners shared the same landscape. The same snow fell on both. The same forests stretched outward. The same wind whistled through the fences and over the roofs of barracks. At night, when the camp settled into silence, both prisoner and guard looked upward at the same sky, stars glittering above the frozen plain. Their experiences were separated by walls and power, but both were bound to the same remote world, both shaped by the same isolation. Imagine the camp once more, seen from a distance. The fences form a square in the vast wilderness, barracks on one side, guard posts on the other. Inside, prisoners lie on their bunks, weary from the day's work. In the towers, guards stand watch, rifles resting at their sides, their eyes scanning the darkness. Different lives, different duties, yet all caught in the same rhythm of the Gulag. From this contrast between prisoners and guards, we will move next to the broader landscape. In our next segment, we will journey outward into the geography of the Gulag, the forests, the tundra, the deserts, and the remote regions where the camps were built, each environment shaping life in its own way. The Gulag was not one place. It was a system scattered across a vast land, stretching from the Arctic tundra to the deserts of Central Asia, from the Siberian taiga to the far eastern shores of the Pacific. Each camp was shaped not only by its fences and guards, but by the environment around it. The geography itself became a kind of wall, as powerful as barbed wire. Many camps lay deep in the Siberian forests, where endless pine and birch trees stood like silent sentinels. The taiga is immense, stretching thousands of miles, its trees dense, its rivers cold, its winters long. Imagine a camp in such a forest. Snow blankets the ground for much of the year, muffling sound, turning every movement into a slow, heavy effort. The trees block the horizon, enclosing the camp in green and white walls that seem to stretch without end. Work here often meant timber. Prisoners cut trees, hauled logs, floated timber down icy rivers. The forest was both a resource and a barrier, rich in wood, yet so vast and unbroken that escape seemed futile. To flee was to vanish into wilderness, with little chance of finding food, shelter, or direction. Further still were the camps of the far north. Here the land was tundra, flat, frozen, treeless. The ground itself remained solid with permafrost, the soil locked in ice even during summer. Imagine stepping outside a barrack in this world. The wind sweeps across open ground without obstruction, sharp and merciless. In winter, the sun barely rises, casting only a dim glow for a few hours before sinking again. The cold is absolute, seeping into every corner, freezing tools, stiffening clothing, turning each breath into a cloud. Work here often meant mining. Coal, nickel, and other minerals were extracted from beneath frozen earth. The camps became industrial outposts, pushing human presence into places where few could otherwise live. The geography was the greatest guard of all. Even without fences, escape was almost impossible. The tundra stretched endlessly, barren of shelter or food, the cold itself as unyielding as stone. Not all camps lay in cold. Some were built in the deserts of Kazakhstan and Central Asia. Here the challenge was not frost, but heat, dryness, and distance. Imagine walking across a desert plain. The air shimmers with heat, the ground cracks with dryness, and dust rises with each step. There is little shade, little water, only the endless horizon of sand and scrub. Camps here often supported agriculture or industry, farming in harsh conditions, building canals, extracting resources from the dry earth. Water was precious, and the heat pressed down relentlessly day after day. Escape was no easier than in Siberia. To flee was to face thirst and exhaustion, with the desert offering little refuge. Other camps stood in the shadow of mountains or along the Pacific coast. In the Far East, near Kolyma, the land was rich in gold, and the Gulag became its primary workforce. The geography was unforgiving. Mountains covered in snow, rivers frozen for much of the year, valleys cut by icy winds. Imagine a mining camp at Kolyma. The ground is frozen so solid that shovels must break through layers of permafrost before any earth can be moved. In summer, the thaw turns ground to mud, making movement slow and exhausting. The isolation is total. The Pacific lies far beyond, the forests dense, the distances immeasurable. What united all these geographies, forest, tundra, desert, mountain, was their isolation. The Soviet Union used the land itself as a form of imprisonment. The remoteness of the camps meant that even without walls, the wilderness was inescapable. Imagine standing at the edge of a camp, gazing outward. Beyond the fence, there is no city, no village, no road, only miles of snow, forest, or sand. The silence is deep, broken only by wind or distant animals. It is a silence that both oppresses and protects, a silence that ensures the camp's presence remains hidden from the wider world. For prisoners, geography was not only a barrier, but a constant companion. The forest became the backdrop of every day's labor. The tundra became the horizon that stretched beyond the camp. The desert became the weight that pressed against every breath. Some prisoners wrote of how nature seemed indifferent. The trees, the snow, the rivers, all continued their rhythms, unchanged by human suffering. For others, nature offered rare moments of solace. The beauty of a sunrise over snow, the sound of a bird in the forest, the brief warmth of the sun after months of winter darkness. Picture the Gulag now, not as a single camp, but as a map. Points scattered across the land, each marked by barracks and fences, each surrounded by wilderness. The geography itself held them as surely as any guard tower. In this way, the Soviet Union used its vastness as part of the system. The land became a prison, silent, immense, and enduring. From geography, we will turn next to another layer of the Gulag's purpose, not only as a place of punishment, but as a source of labor. In our next segment, we will step into the economy of the camps, how the Gulag fueled Soviet industry, construction, and ambition. The Gulag was not only a prison system, it was also an economic machine, woven into the fabric of the Soviet Union's ambitions. Behind the fences, beyond the barracks, the camps served as engines of labor, producing timber, coal, gold, and canals that fueled the state's vision of progress. For the Soviet government, labor was both discipline and productivity. It was punishment for those accused of crimes, dissent, or resistance. But it was also a resource, human strength directed toward projects that advanced the state. Imagine an official in Moscow, pen in hand, reviewing reports from distant camps. The documents list not only the number of prisoners, but the amount of timber harvested, the tons of coal mined, the length of railway constructed. To the state, the Gulag was measured not in lives, but in output. Forests were among the most common sites of labor. In Siberia, prisoners cut timber year-round, felling trees that would be shipped to build houses, factories, and railways. Picture a line of men in the snow, axes rising and falling. The sound is rhythmic, the steady thud of metal on wood, followed by the slow crack as a tree leans, groans, and finally falls with a crash. Logs are dragged by hand or loaded onto sleds and pulled through the snow by horses. The forest thins, but never disappears, for it stretches endlessly beyond the horizon. Timber from the Gulag entered the Soviet economy quietly, part of construction projects across the nation, though few who used it knew its origin. In the north and east, camps were built near mines rich in coal, copper, nickel, and gold. The Kalima region, in particular, became infamous for its gold mines, where tens of thousands labored in frozen earth. Imagine a miner at Kalima, standing in a shaft cut into the permafrost. The ground is hard, frozen even in summer. Tools strike against it with slow progress, breaking through inch by inch. The air is damp, heavy, carrying the scent of earth and stone. Buckets of ore are hauled upward, processed, and sent away, becoming part of the Soviet Union's reserves. The mines demanded endless labor. They swallowed human strength, replacing it constantly with new arrivals, while the ore continued to flow outward. Beyond forests and mines, the Gulag was tasked with building. Camps supplied labor for massive construction projects, railways, roads, dams, and canals. One of the most famous was the White Sea-Baltic Canal, built in the 1930s. Tens of thousands of prisoners dug it by hand, shovels and picks, breaking through soil, mud, and stone. The canal stretched hundreds of kilometers, linking the White Sea with the Baltic, symbolizing Soviet determination and industrial might. But the work was relentless. Men dug day after day, their tools simple, their progress measured in inches. The project was completed quickly, at enormous human cost. yet hailed as a triumph of the Soviet system. Imagine the sight: long lines of men moving earth, carrying stones, water rising in channels carved by sheer force of labor. The sound is steady, shovels scraping, carts rolling, voices murmuring, a chorus of effort that reshaped the landscape. Not all labor was industrial. Some camps focused on farming, raising crops and livestock to feed both prisoners and the state. Fields were plowed, potatoes planted, grain harvested. In the deserts of Central Asia, prisoners dug irrigation canals to bring water to arid soil, transforming land through sheer persistence. The harvests, like the timber and the minerals, flowed outward into the Soviet economy, absorbed silently into the nation's supply. By the 1940s and 1950s, the Gulag had become deeply entwined with the Soviet economy. It provided timber for industry, coal for factories, gold for reserves, food for supply, and infrastructure that stretched across the land. Estimates suggest that Gulag labor contributed significantly to sectors of the Soviet economy, though precise numbers are difficult to measure. But what is clear is this: the state relied on the labor of prisoners, not only to punish them, but to build the foundations of its vision of progress. For ordinary Soviet citizens, the products of the Gulag were often invisible. They walked on roads, lived in houses, or read books printed on paper made from Gulag timber without knowing its source. The labor of the camps was absorbed into daily life, hidden behind the fences, unseen but always present. Imagine holding a book printed in Moscow, its pages smooth, the paper bright. Few would think of the forests of Siberia, of men with axes cutting trees in deep snow. Yet the connection exists, quiet and unspoken. Think of the Gulag as a vast machine, each camp a cog, each prisoner a moving part. The machine produced timber, coal, gold, food, and roads. It sustained itself through human effort, measured not in comfort or choice, but in endurance. The Gulag was punishment, but it was also economy. It was discipline, but it was also production. And in this dual role, it became essential to the Soviet Union's vision of itself. A state built not only by free citizens, but by those laboring behind fences in distant wilderness. From the economy, we will turn in our next segment to the social contrasts of the Gulag, exploring how class, background, and identity shaped the experiences of prisoners. From political dissidents to ordinary criminals, from intellectuals to peasants, the Gulag was not a single community, but a vast mixture of people from every corner of the Soviet Union. In the barracks, one could find farmers and poets, engineers and laborers, soldiers and priests, criminals and professors, all reduced to the same routines of roll call, labor, and survival. And yet, their backgrounds shaped how they endured, how they interacted, and how they remembered. Many who entered the Gulag were not criminals in the ordinary sense, but political prisoners, those accused of disloyalty, resistance, or dissent. Some were leaders of opposition parties, others were ordinary citizens who spoke too freely, or who were denounced by neighbors or colleagues. Imagine a former teacher, once surrounded by books and students, now standing in a snowy forest with an axe in hand. His knowledge of literature or mathematics is of little use here. Yet he carries it within him, a memory of a world beyond the fences. At night, he may whisper verses of poetry to himself, or share them quietly with others, preserving fragments of culture in the barracks' silence. For political prisoners, the Gulag was a world turned upside down. From classrooms and offices to frozen labor, from speech and debate to silence and watchfulness. Alongside the political prisoners were common criminals, thieves, smugglers, and others convicted of crimes unrelated to politics. They often had different rhythms, different instincts, different ways of surviving. Imagine a barrack where a criminal prisoner plays cards in the corner, his voice louder, his manner rougher. He has learned how to negotiate, how to trade, how to bend rules within the camp's structures. To him, imprisonment is not new. The Gulag is harsher, colder, more demanding, but still a continuation of a life shaped by hardship and risk. These prisoners sometimes held authority within the camp's informal hierarchies, their boldness granting them influence in the barracks. Their presence added complexity to daily life, creating both tension and occasional alliances with political inmates. Another large group were peasants swept into the Gulag during the years of collectivization, accused of hoarding grain, resisting state policies, or simply being kulaks, wealthier farmers. They were sent to labor far from their villages. Imagine a farmer used to the soil of his homeland, standing now in the Siberian forest. The rhythms of his past life, plowing fields, planting seeds, harvesting crops, are gone, replaced by axes, shovels, and chains of timber. Yet his resilience is strong, built on years of toil, on familiarity with hardship. He labors quietly, conserving strength, his thoughts often with the fields he left behind. For peasants, the Gulag was another form of labor, though stripped of family, freedom, and home. Their endurance often lay in their familiarity with physical work, but the loss of land and community cut deeply. Among the prisoners were also intellectuals, writers, poets, scientists, and artists. Their presence in the camps created contrasts. Minds accustomed to ideas, debate, and creativity placed suddenly in worlds of shovels and mud. Imagine a poet, once seated at a desk with pen and paper, now carrying timber across snow. At night, he recites verses quietly, composing lines in his head, storing them until paper can be found. Sometimes he shares them with others, offering moments of beauty in the barracks' silence. For intellectuals, the Gulag was both destruction and creation, destroying careers, silencing voices, yet also producing memoirs, poems, and reflections that later carried the memory of the camps to the wider world. There were also soldiers, some captured in wars, others accused of disloyalty or misconduct. They brought discipline and pride, but also the weight of betrayal, feeling cast aside by the very state they had served. Imagine a former officer, once in command of men, now following orders from guards, carrying logs with prisoners who were once civilians. The shift is profound, the hierarchy inverted, yet his bearing remains, his memories of uniform and duty intact, even within the fences. Women, too, were present in the Gulag. They labored alongside men, cut timber, dug earth, worked in kitchens or sewing workshops. Their barracks were separate, but their struggles similar. Imagine a mother in a women's camp, her hands raw from work, her thoughts always with the children she left behind. At night, she hums lullabies to herself, the melodies faint but steady, preserving memory and comfort in the silence. Some formed small circles of support, sharing food, offering comfort, holding one another through the long winters. For them, survival often meant not only enduring physically, but sustaining emotionally through bonds of friendship and memory. Within each barrack, these groups mixed political prisoners with criminals, peasants with intellectuals, soldiers with laborers. The contrasts were stark, yet in the rhythm of the camp, all were reduced to the same tasks. Standing in line at roll call, swinging axes in the forest, sleeping on wooden bunks at night. Imagine a barrack lit by a single stove. In one corner, a criminal plays cards. In another, a teacher quietly explains mathematics to a fellow prisoner. Nearby, a peasant mends a boot with quiet skill. Each life different, each past distinct. Yet now all bound by the same fences, the same silence, the same unending cold. The Gulag was not one story, but many. It was a collision of classes, professions, and identities. It was the merging of farmers and poets, criminals and teachers, men and women, soldiers and peasants. Each brought their past with them, yet in the camp all were reshaped by the same rhythm of labor and survival. When we listen to the voices of the Gulag, we hear not one tone but a chorus. Diverse, uneven, sometimes discordant, yet united by the echo of endurance. From these contrasts of background, we will turn next to a deeper mystery, the question of escape and survival. In our next segment, we will step into the rare but powerful stories of those who attempted to flee the Gulag, and what the wilderness beyond the fences meant for them. The Gulag was a prison not only of fences and guards, but of geography itself. And yet, even knowing the risks, some prisoners dreamed of escape. For them, the wilderness beyond the fences seemed to offer freedom, a chance, however slim, to leave the camp behind. But the reality was harsh. The forests, the tundra, the deserts, and the mountains were as relentless as the guards. To flee the Gulag was to exchange one struggle for another. Imagine standing near the camp's edge at night. The guard towers are dimly lit, their lanterns glowing faintly against the dark sky. The air is sharp, the snow crunches underfoot, and the silence feels vast, broken only by the occasional call of a bird or the distant rustle of wind through trees. A prisoner makes the choice. He slips away quietly, finding a gap, climbing a fence, or taking advantage of a guard's distraction. For a moment, he breathes the air of freedom. But beyond the fence lies not safety, but wilderness. Most camps lay deep in forests, where trees stretched endlessly. To walk into the taiga was to vanish into a world of pine and birch, snow and silence. Imagine stepping into this forest. The ground is thick with snow in winter, or with mud in spring. The trees stand close, their branches blocking the horizon, their shadows long and dark. The air is filled with the scent of resin and damp earth, but also with the stillness of distance. For days, an escapee might walk, guided only by instinct or memory, yet the forest seems endless. Food is scarce, the cold unyielding, and rivers or mountains block the way. Many who fled into the taiga never returned, lost not to guards but to the land itself. In the northern camps, escape meant stepping into tundra. Here, the land is flat and bare, stretching outward like a frozen sea. There are no trees, no cover, only open ground and wind that cuts through clothing. Imagine walking across this tundra. The snow is deep, the cold absolute. The horizon stretches endlessly, offering no shelter, no landmarks, only the same white in every direction. Without supplies, without guidance, survival is nearly impossible. In the Arctic, the land itself became the most vigilant guard, preventing escape more surely than any fence. Elsewhere, camps were built in deserts. Here, the danger was not frost, but heat. The land stretched dry and cracked, the air shimmering, water scarce. Imagine fleeing into this desert. The sun beats down during the day, while at night the cold creeps in. Thirst grows quickly, each step heavier than the last. The horizon seems endless, and the wind lifts dust that blinds and stings. The desert, like the forest and tundra, offered no mercy to those who fled. And yet, some few did survive. There are accounts of prisoners who walked for weeks, living on berries, roots, or fish caught from rivers. Others joined villages far from the camps, blending into local life, hiding their past. Some were aided by strangers, peasants, herders, or families who offered food and shelter despite the risks. These stories are rare, but they reveal a human determination that even fences and wilderness could not fully suppress. For most prisoners, escape was not an act, but a dream. A thought whispered in the barracks. A plan sketched in imagination. A hope carried silently. Even when the chances were slim, the very idea of escape provided a form of endurance. A reminder that beyond the fences lay a world untouched by the camp. Imagine a prisoner lying on his bunk at night, gazing upward at the wooden ceiling. He knows he may never leave. Yet, in his mind, he walks again through the fields of his village, or the streets of his city, free of guards, free of fences. The dream itself becomes a kind of freedom. The Gulag was designed to be inescapable, and in most cases it was. The land itself, forests, tundra, deserts, acted as the strongest barrier. Yet the human spirit, even within such confines, carried the thought of freedom. Whether realized in action or preserved in dreams, the idea of escape was a quiet resistance, a reminder that the camp, though vast, was not the whole of the world. From the wilderness beyond the fences, we will turn next to the role of faith, belief, and resilience within the camps. In our next segment, we will explore how prisoners turned to religion, philosophy, and quiet rituals of meaning to endure their daily lives. In the Gulag, survival required more than food, clothing, or shelter. It required inner strength, a way of finding meaning within hardship, a way of keeping hope alive even when the days seemed endless. For many, that strength came through faith, belief, or quiet rituals of resilience. These were not loud or public, but quiet, subtle, woven into the rhythm of daily life like threads in worn cloth. The Soviet Union was officially atheistic, and religious practice was restricted, yet faith endured even in the camps. Some prisoners whispered prayers at night, moving their lips silently so that guards could not hear. Others traced the sign of the cross discreetly, or recited verses of scripture from memory, holding on to words they had learned long before their imprisonment. Imagine a man lying on his bunk after a day of labor. His hands are clasped beneath the thin blanket, his lips barely move. But inside his mind, he repeats the same prayer he has said since childhood. The words are steady, familiar, carrying him beyond the cold barrack walls into a sense of continuity and connection. For him, prayer is not escape, but anchor, a rhythm that steadies the mind when everything else feels uncertain. Though forbidden, small symbols of faith sometimes appeared in the camps. A cross carved into wood, a star scratched onto a wall, a piece of paper folded into the shape of a prayer. These tokens were fragile, easily lost, yet they carried enormous meaning. Imagine finding a small scrap of cloth embroidered with a symbol, passed quietly from one prisoner to another. It is not elaborate, but it is a reminder of family, of tradition, of belief that the camp could not erase. Such objects were often hidden carefully, yet their presence was enough to lift spirits, to remind prisoners that beyond the fences there was still a larger world of meaning. Not all found comfort in religion. Some turned to philosophy, to ideas and reflections that offered endurance in a different way. Intellectuals and writers often recited poems, quoted philosophers, or composed new works in their minds, repeating them until the lines were memorized. Imagine a prisoner recite. The Gulag system existed before the war. But when the Second World War came to the Soviet Union in 1941, its rhythms changed. The invasion by Nazi Germany, known as the Great Patriotic War in Russia, reshaped every aspect of Soviet life. For the Gulag, it meant new challenges, new purposes, and new demands upon prisoners and guards alike. When the war began, the camps did not vanish, nor did they lessen in severity. But their labor became even more essential. Timber, coal, and minerals were needed for the war effort. Railroads and canals remained vital for supply. Every axe strike, every shovel of earth, every cart of coal became part of a larger machinery of war. Imagine a prisoner in the forest in 1942 swinging his axe against a tree. The sound echoes in the cold air, but now he knows that the timber may soon become part of a railway or factory, contributing to the defense of the Soviet Union. The work remains the same, but the sense of urgency has deepened. The Gulag also received new kinds of prisoners. Captured soldiers from enemy armies, especially Germans, were sent to labor in Soviet camps. They joined the existing mix of criminals, political prisoners, and exiles, creating an even more complex population. Imagine a barrack where a Soviet political prisoner lies on one bunk, while a captured German soldier rests nearby. Both wear the same rough clothing, both eat the same thin soup, both march to the same labor. Their pasts could not be more different, yet their present is identical, shaped by the same fences and the same silence of the camp. For prisoners already in the Gulag, the war brought new suspicions. Some were accused of sympathizing with the enemy, of being spies or traitors, even when there was no evidence. Others were arrested during the war and sent to the camps simply for being part of suspect nationalities: Poles, Ukrainians, Balts, and Volga Germans, among others. The Gulag became not only a place of punishment for individuals, but a tool of control over entire groups. The war years brought greater hardship. Supplies were stretched thin across the Soviet Union, and camps often faced shortages of food, clothing, and medicine. Prisoners, already accustomed to hunger, found rations reduced even further. Clothing grew worn, boots fell apart, and the long winters pressed harder still. Imagine standing in line for rations in 1943, the bowl in your hands lighter than ever before. The soup is thinner, the bread smaller, yet still precious. Every bite is measured, every drop essential for survival. For guards, too, the war meant scarcity. Supplies reached the camps less regularly, isolation deepened, and discipline grew harsher. During the war, some prisoners were released to serve in the Red Army. Men who had once swung axes in the forest now carried rifles at the front. For them, the transition was abrupt. From prisoner to soldier, from barrack to battlefield. Imagine a man standing in camp one morning, summoned by officials. He is handed a uniform, a rifle, and told that he will fight for the very state that imprisoned him. Confusion mixes with duty, fear with relief. The fence behind him is replaced by a new boundary, the front line. Not all survived, but for some, this release became a path back to freedom, though at immense risk. When the war ended in 1945, the Gulag did not disappear. Instead, it grew once more, filled with new prisoners, not only Soviet citizens, but also civilians and soldiers from territories newly under Soviet influence. Poles, Balts, Ukrainians, and others joined the existing population. The camps became even more diverse, their barracks filled with languages from across Europe and Asia. Their stories layered with new complexities. The rhythm of labor continued. Timber was cut or was mined. Railways were built. The war had ended, but the Gulag endured, adapting to the new needs of the state. The war years left a shadow over the Gulag. They had shown the Soviet leadership how essential the camps could be to the state's economy. and they reinforced the system's role as both punishment and resource, but they also revealed the resilience of those inside. Prisoners who survived not only the fences and the cold, but also the shortages and strains of wartime. Their survival, quiet and unrecorded, was another kind of endurance, another reminder of the strength of the human spirit. Picture a camp in 1944. The barracks stand in snow, the fences tall, the guard towers lit. Inside, men and women lie on their bunks, weary from labor, their stomachs empty, but their minds still carrying thoughts of families, of home, of peace. They hear distant news of battles, of armies moving, of victories and losses. But inside the fences, life continues, as always. The same roll calls, the same labor, the same search for strength in small moments. The Gulag during the war was not only a prison, but a reflection of the Soviet Union itself. Stretched, strained, yet enduring, shaped by both hardship and determination. No system lasts forever. The Gulag, which once seemed unshakable, gradually began to fade. Its decline was not sudden, but slow, marked by moments of change, by political shifts, and by the quiet return of prisoners to lives they had long been separated from. In March 1953, Joseph Stalin died. For decades, his shadow had loomed over the Soviet Union, shaping its policies, its culture, and its people. His death created a pause, a moment of uncertainty, in which the structures he had built were suddenly vulnerable. Imagine the Soviet Union at that moment. Factories continue to hum, trains continue to run, the forests and tundra remain as they were. But in offices and homes, people speak more freely, cautiously at first, as though testing the air. The figure who had been present in every portrait, every newspaper, every speech, is gone. For the Gulag, this meant change. The state no longer had the same drive to maintain such vast networks of labor and punishment. Gradually, policies shifted. Shortly after Stalin's death, an amnesty was declared. Hundreds of thousands of prisoners, especially those convicted of lesser crimes, were released. The camps did not empty overnight, but for many, the gates finally opened. Imagine a prisoner who has spent years in the Gulag, stepping outside the fence, not to labor, but to leave. The air feels the same, the snow crunches the same beneath his boots. But now he walks not toward the forest or the mine, but toward freedom. The path is uncertain, his home distant, his future unknown, yet the fence is behind him. For families, this meant reunions, though often bittersweet. Loved ones returned older, weaker, changed by years of absence. Children had grown, villages had shifted, cities had rebuilt. The Gulag's presence lingered, even after departure. Under Nikita Khrushchev, who rose to power after Stalin, the Soviet Union entered a period sometimes called the Thaw. In 1956, Khrushchev delivered a secret speech denouncing Stalin's crimes, including the abuses of the Gulag system. The acknowledgement was cautious, but it marked a shift in tone, a recognition that the system had gone too far. During these years, more prisoners were released. Political prisoners, in particular, saw their sentences shortened, their convictions reconsidered. Camps closed, barracks emptied, the vast network began to contract. Imagine walking past a camp once filled with thousands. The fences are still there, the guard towers still stand, but the barracks are empty, the silence deeper than before. Nature begins to reclaim the space. Weeds pushing through wooden floors, snow drifting across unused paths, birds nesting in rafters where once prisoners slept. The dismantling of the Gulag took time. Some camps lingered into the 1960s, their functions shifting, their populations reduced. But gradually, the name Gulag itself became less central, less spoken, less present in daily Soviet life. For those released, the challenge of return remained. Re-entering society was not simple. Many carried the label of former prisoner, which could bring stigma, suspicion, and restrictions. Finding work was difficult, reconnecting with family often painful. The Gulag did not vanish from lives simply because the fences were left behind. Even as the camps closed, silence often surrounded them. The Soviet Union did not openly discuss the Gulag for decades. Families whispered of it. Survivors carried memories, but public acknowledgement remained limited. It was only in later years that memoirs and histories began to circulate more widely, bringing the stories of the Gulag into the light. Imagine a man sitting in his kitchen in the 1970s, decades after his release. He drinks tea, looks out at the street, and remembers the forests, the barracks, the fences. He speaks little of it, perhaps only to a close friend or relative, but the memories remain, steady and unshaken. For him, the Gulag is not history. It is lived experience, carried quietly. By the end of the 1960s, the Gulag as a vast network no longer existed. Smaller prison colonies remained, but the era of massive labor camps stretching across Siberia and beyond was over. What had once been a defining feature of Soviet rule became a shadow, fading into memory, though never truly gone. The forests, the tundra, the deserts still hold their silence. In some places, the remains of barracks still stand. Weathered wood, rusting metal, broken fences, nature has reclaimed them, yet they remain as quiet reminders of the lives once lived there. Picture one of these abandoned camps today. The wind whistles through broken windows. Snow drifts across empty yards. The guard towers are weathered, leaning slightly, their wood grayed by time. The barracks are silent, but if you listen, you can almost hear the echo of footsteps, the murmur of voices, the steady rhythm of labor. The Gulag has ended, but its memory endures, not only in history, but in the lives it touched, in the silence it left behind, in the resilience of those who survived. The Gulag, though dismantled decades ago, has never truly vanished. Its fences are gone, its barracks mostly empty, yet its memory lingers. In history, in literature, in families, and in the silent landscapes where the camps once stood. To speak of the Gulag today is to speak not only of the past, but of how we remember, and what lessons remain for the present. In the forests of Siberia, in the tundra of the north, in the deserts of Central Asia, traces of the camps can still be found. Wooden barracks, weathered and leaning, rusting barbed wire, sagging against the earth. Guard towers, their windows broken, their frames grey with time. Imagine walking through one of these sites today. The silence is deep, broken only by wind or the cry of a bird. Snow drifts across empty paths where once hundreds of boots marched. Inside the barracks, the air is cold, the floors rough, the walls carved with faint markings, initials, dates, fragments of names. Nature has reclaimed much, but the traces remain. They are reminders, quiet but insistent, that these places were once filled with lives, with voices, with endurance. Perhaps the greatest legacy of the Gulag lies not in its ruins, but in its words. Memoirs written by survivors, poems composed in secret, testimonies shared in later years. These fragments carry the memory of the camps to us. Writers such as Alexander Solzhenitsyn, who endured years in the Gulag, transformed personal experience into works that revealed the system to the world. His book, The Gulag Archipelago, became a landmark, weaving together thousands of accounts into a tapestry of memory. Others wrote more quietly, memoirs circulated in samizdat underground publications, or spoken in whispers to trusted listeners. Imagine holding one of these books. Its pages are filled with calm, steady words, describing snow, labor, silence, endurance. The voice on the page reaches across time, across distance, carrying with it the experience of someone who once lived behind the fences. These words ensure that the Gulag is not forgotten. They transform silence into memory, absence into presence. The Gulag also left its mark on families. For every prisoner, there were relatives who waited, often not knowing if their loved ones would return. Children grew up without parents, spouses carried absence like a weight, villages lost members to exile. When prisoners returned, families reunited, but not always seamlessly. Years of absence had changed both sides. Children were grown, spouses had aged, communities had moved on. The reunion was joyful, yet often carried the quiet pain of years lost. The legacy of the Gulag was thus not only individual, but generational. Families carried the memory forward, shaping how later generations understood both suffering and resilience. What lessons remain from the Gulag? It shows us the dangers of unchecked power, of systems that seek to silence and control. It shows us the resilience of the human spirit, the ability to endure, to find meaning, to preserve identity, even in the harshest conditions. It reminds us that history is not only grand events, but daily lives. The rhythm of labor, the silence of barracks, the small acts of kindness that sustains survival. Above all, it teaches us that memory matters. To remember the Gulag is to honor those who endured it, to ensure that their silence is not final, that their presence remains part of our shared human story. Picture now the Gulag as it exists in memory, not as a system of camps, not as fences and guards, but as voices, quiet, steady, carried through time. Voices of those who labored, of those who prayed, of those who sang quietly at night, of those who dreamed of freedom. Their voices joined together, not loud, but persistent, reminding us of both suffering and strength. The Gulag has ended, but its lessons endure. In ruins, in words, in memory, it remains with us, steady as the rhythm of history itself. We have traveled far tonight, from the daily routines of the camps, the barracks, the roll calls, the labor in forests and mines, to the figure of Stalin, who expanded the system to the hidden voices that preserved memory. To the contrasts between guards and prisoners, we have walked through the geography of Siberia, the tundra, and the desert. And we have glimpsed both the rare attempts at escape and the quiet resilience that kept prisoners alive. We have seen how the Gulag became part of the Soviet economy, how it endured even during war, how it slowly declined after Stalin's death, and how its legacy still whispers to us in memoirs, in ruins, and in memory. The Gulag was a place of hardship, of silence, of endurance. It reduced lives to labor, families to absence, and voices to whispers. Yet even within its fences, humanity endured, in kindness, in memory, in faith, in song. The system has ended, but the memory remains, reminding us of both the dangers of oppression and the resilience of the human spirit. As you listen now, you are safe, far removed from the frost, the barracks, the endless forests of the Gulag. Your room is warm, your bed soft, your body at rest. Outside your window, the night is calm. Perhaps you hear only the quiet hum of your surroundings, the steady rhythm of your own breathing. Where once prisoners dreamed of freedom beyond fences, you now have freedom without thinking of it. Where once men and women endured cold and hunger, you have warmth and comfort. The contrast is vast. yet it makes the present all the more precious. Now it is time to let go of the images of the Gulag. Let the barracks fade. Let the fences dissolve. Let the forests and tundra fall into silence once more. Hold only the rhythm, calm, steady, unhurried, the rhythm of history, the rhythm of your breathing, the rhythm of rest. Imagine the snow falling softly over the ruins of an old camp, covering the ground, smoothing the edges, quieting the past. All is still, all is calm. And so, too, you may be still and calm and at peace. Take a slow breath. Let your body sink into rest. The journey is complete. The past belongs to memory, and the present belongs to your peace. To help you drift further, I have added calm music at the end of this video. Let it carry you gently, like a steady current, like the slow fall of snow, into deeper and deeper sleep. Good night. Rest well.